God's grace and peace be with you. On this Good Friday, it's always a challenge for the preacher to speak to a community that comes together because there is no good news yet on this day, or at least it doesn't seem like it. Most of the Christian community is skipping this day of worship altogether, except for traditions where it's a day of obligation. A lot of people don't go to worship on Good Friday. They don't like the darkness. They don't like the emphasis on dying. They don't like the grief and the suffering. Some people don't like the sense of shame that they feel because they were raised with messages that really focused on, look how much you made Jesus suffer with your sin. That's not what this day is about at all. But the reality of the death is still definitely there. And in these days, we're tired of hearing about death. During this pandemic and this time of isolation, it has been a constant on all of our minds and weighing on all of our hearts, and we're desperate for some good news to lift us out of this contemplation of the thing that we fear so much. Our culture is not good with death. We spend incredible amounts of resources and time and energy trying to deny its encroachment, trying to extend our youth, trying to pretend that it will not come and claim us. We spend our money and our energy on things to make us look younger and things that will promise us health, and we do everything in our power to stave off the reality of death, almost as though we can do it forever. We have a hard time sitting with death. And it is a hard thing to do. Any of us who have sat at the bedside of a loved one who is journeying in that way of death, we know how hard it is. We know how hard it is for the one who's dying and how hard it is for those who sit vigil with the one who is dying. It's a challenging thing that our culture doesn't prepare us for very well. And I understand why so many people don't like Good Friday. Oddly enough, though, this is one of my favorite times of worship in the year. I think because, again, I appreciate the ability to lay down the pretext. I appreciate the ability to lay down the fight, to stop struggling against death and sit with it for a while. Bide with it. Bide with Jesus as he faces death. He has known all along what he was going into, and as I've mentioned in some of my recent sermons, I don't know whether he fully understood all of it, but in John's gospel, it's very, very clear that Jesus goes into this day's events by his own power, by his own choice, and with full understanding of what he faces. He walks with death by choice, by his power. It's not an act of powerlessness and it's not an act of submission, but it is an act of courage, a choice. It's an action, not something that happens to him, but that's something that he does. That's counterintuitive for most of us. But again, the promise this day is the one that we preachers proclaim every single year on this day. That this is good news for us because the God of life has entered into and faced death for us. And so it no longer has ultimate and final power. We can sit in the presence of death because we know that Christ has prepared a way for us through it, not around it. Jesus did not get to the resurrection by making an end round around the cross. We go through it to find new life. And it's difficult and it's painful and it's heartbreaking and grievous, but that is not the last word. And so this time of just sitting, not fighting, not fearing, not denying, but just sitting in the presence of death, knowing that Christ is here with us and that Christ has walked this path so that we can lay down our fear. That is a gift to me. The recognition of all of the harm that I work on myself and on others, the recognition of the struggle and the pain I face because of the brokenness and hurt of others laid upon me, the realization that others are walking with pain that I have laid on them, and that all of this brokenness is another manifestation of death. To just acknowledge that it's real and that it's powerful and that we can't deny it or hide it or cover it up anymore. That is a relief to just stop fighting and sit with the truth. Because the other truth that comes with that, is the promise of Christ. The fact that he walked this path with us, that he has shared death with us. It is a promise that God will not abandon us, not in anything, and that the pain and the grief and the suffering are not the last word. The hope comes not when we deny that death exists. The hope comes when we realize that as real as death is, Christ's presence with us in the midst of it is even more real. And that we have hope because we know it may be a long wait, but we know that Easter is coming. So we can bide in these times of struggle and loneliness and isolation and hurt and fear. We can bide in these times with some courage and some grace and some peace, even in the face of death, because life waits for us with tremendous love and power that even death can't overcome. Christ dies so that God is with us in all things, and that we are with God in him forever. Thanks be to God. Amen.